This session is about the customization of Web AppBuilder. How many of you have been working on Web AppBuilder? Wow. Actually, we should stop. We don't need doing this. Yeah. Okay. My name is Maxi Zhang. I'm director of Beijing R&D Center, where we're doing a development and working on a product like a Web AppBuilder, ArcGIS Earth, Survey 123, a few other things. And Gavin is a web developer, is doing lots of JavaScript development and very experienced with Web AppBuilder. So today really we talk about the customization part of it, Web AppBuilder, not the configuration part of it. It's actually a development aspect of a Web AppBuilder. Can you hear me all right in the back? Okay, cool. So let's start with talking about app creation. They're quite challenging actually create applications, web applications as well. And we summarize the 10 of them. Probably there are more challenges when you're actually doing the real development. And you have to translate the business requirement to actually the applications, right? You need to build applications which require certain skills, development skills. You need to have people understand program languages, things like that. And you have to maintain applications, and you have to understand how application is being used, etc., etc. Go ahead.
Oh, the screen went out.
Are you off? Oh, I need somebody to help on that.
I don't know if is there.
So anybody here to help? So it's total black there. Could you take?
There's nothing on this screen.
Do you switch it? Try switching between 4 and 3. And see.
No input is detected.
Still? Okay. Should we continue? All right. I'm sure we'll find somebody in here to help us. Okay, so there are a lot of challenges, right, to build applications, especially in a traditional way. So what exactly the traditional way of doing the application development? So here it is. Usually you start with some ideas or some requirements. You want to build something to solve your business problem or to do something. And you have some, modules or functions, features to put together. You have a little small application developed, and over time you're gonna add more features and functions. Your application grow, but this is never stop because internally your function feature will be wired together. It's getting more complicated, and there are going to be a lot more requirements from users. Actually, we experience this as well as software development companies. There's a lot of requirements coming day and nights, and your application become really below the big application. So that's what happened actually. Traditional way to develop an application. It's not bad actually. We still have software doing this way, but that should change. Right? There's one challenge actually doing this way is that you spend a lot of time, lots of money doing it, but in the end, they said, well, your users, the customer would tell you, say, hey, that's not exactly what we wanted. Probably everybody has some kind of experience of that. That sucks, right? Okay, so with all that, a few years ago, we come up with this new software, new product. We call that Web AppBuilder. We just want to have a better experience for our users, you, or maybe your users, to build application easily and simply. And after that, by doing that, actually, we changed the whole process of creating applications. You start from here, basically. We're going to have a GUI builder. The graphic environment help you to take what you need. Widgets, it's pre-built components, actions actually. And then we take themes we're going to talk about. and with the STEM apps, we call it, and you put all things together through configuration, then you have a web app. That's how we give to you through the Web AppBuilder to build applications rather than start from anything from scratch. So using this kind of application creation tools over the last couple of years, we did a little bit of counting actually. Is that there's like 300 some applications already created ArcGIS Online. This is definitely won't be the case if you do in a traditional way of software development. There's a lot of apps available. So now today is actually for developers. We're going to talk about how exactly this is related to developer. Are we taking developer away from this actual way of doing this? No, actually, it's just different way of doing web application development. So I'm going to start with a little bit of introduction, and then we dive into the development aspect of the Web AppBuilder. Gavin going to cover that. Then I'll talk about the themes. That's another aspect of development. Then we showing us how actually together we can help each other. And then we'll have some question and answer segment. So the quick introduction. From Esri, we have different ways of doing the software development, doing the web development. We have provided a lot of sample code, and a traditional way of doing it, so you can copy and paste, come up your own applications. And we have configurable apps. We used to call it that app templates. You can take it and do a little bit of configuration, come up your web applications. Now the Web AppBuilder is a different way I was just talking about. Basically, you're going to focus on developing the widgets or maybe themes and contribute to the communities. Also, the big part of this from Esri. Then you're going to use the Web AppBuilder as tools to configure the app, put them together, make it available to your customers. Now to do that, you need the developer edition of Web AppBuilder. If you're familiar with the online portal, you know there's a built-in version of it, and when you're trying to create an application. But as a developer, you want to create your own widgets, the themes. You need to download this developer edition. That's pretty much what you take actually as what you have and start doing development. Now I mentioned earlier, there's really two aspects of development. You're not going to develop the whole application from scratch. You focus on doing the two kinds of development. One is the widgets. Widgets is something, it's a self-contained piece of code. Basically, you can deploy to the Web AppBuilder and later on to use it as the component to build application. Then there's the themes. So as a developers, you don't need to worry about actually the plumbing side of the application, right? Build everything together in the things like that. You only need to focus on develop the widgets, which is solve some business problem, which is focus on certain tasks you want a user to do, and we do the rest of the things. So it's quite important to understand how, as developers, how you can actually proceed to develop the widgets. So let's move on to next session, really dive into this part of it, and Gavin can cover that and how actually start developing widgets.
Great, thanks, Moxie.
Which one?
Can you switch for him?
Which one?
Number 3.
All right.
So creating custom widget uses the same skills that you already have with building custom JavaScript apps. So on the right-hand side, and can you all see my screen? Is it okay? So on the right-hand side is a current web application that you may have already built and you may be familiar with. At the top, we've got some CSS. In the middle, we've got all of our JavaScript logic, and at the bottom, we've got our HTML template. So in Web AppBuilder, we take those three concepts and just separate them out into separate CSS, JavaScript, and HTML files. With Web AppBuilder widgets, we'll be creating Dojo modules that inherit from base widget. Base widget is a module that's provided by the GIMU library of Web AppBuilder. So this is similar to how plain Dojo applications, or in plain Dojo applications, we inherit from digit widget base. which provides us with the digit lifecycle methods like post, create, and startup on the left here. But in Web AppBuilder, we are extending from widget-based, so we also even have additional lifecycle methods that we can use, like onOpen, onActive, etc. Base widget, in addition to those lifecycle functions, gives your app properties. The app's config through this.config, or the map object through this.map, or events and state, etc. So you have a lot of so you can access a lot of stuff, but your job as a developer is to build all of these events and things together into a UI with your own business logic and your own workflows. Maybe defining out what the widget settings will be, and of course making sure your UI is properly translated. The structure of a Web AppBuilder widget is quite opinionated, which is another way of saying Web AppBuilder expects certain files to be in certain places. So on here, the manifest.json file is required. That's what tells Web AppBuilder about your particular widget. It has both some kind of metadata and some property data that talks about the functionality of your widget. We'll talk about that more later. The widget.js file is also required. That's the main entry point into your widget, your JavaScript logic. Everything else here is optional. From the widget.html would be your HTML template. Your CSS at the top is your styles. Your images, you've got a folder for that. The NLS folder is special. That's where we store our translations and localization files. And the setting folder is special as well. So that's almost a mini widget in itself. That's for the code that shows when the app author is adding your widget to an app, it shows that setting page. And so you can control what that looks like yourself. So now that we've kind of talked a little bit about widget development, let's create a widget. And today we're going to create a restaurant finder widget. You can start a widget from a variety of methods by either creating the files from scratch, starting by copying an existing widget, or even using a widget generator, which kind of simplifies the process of creating a blank widget for you. So in this demo, I'm going to start by starting with a sample widget, but just a quick note that if you're interested in that more advanced widget generator workflow, we're going to talk about that tomorrow in the Web AppBuilder Advanced Tools and Techniques talk. So I'm going to jump over to Web AppBuilder. So I've already went to developers.arcgis.com/webappbuilder, and I've logged in and clicked download the SDK. I've extracted the files, and I've run Web AppBuilder. So I've got it running here, and that also created my Web AppBuilder root directory here. So in Web AppBuilder, and sorry, I know Windows Explorer is a little small, so I'll try to just stay in this part for a short amount of time. But Web AppBuilder, when extracted, gives you a couple folders: the client folder and the server folder, and then the startup.bat. Startup.bat is how we run our app, and in the client stem app folder, in the widgets folder, is where all the out-of-the-box widgets are located. So this is nice from a development perspective. If you're just getting into it, you can kind of check out these widgets, right? So maybe what does the base map gallery look like? You can literally just go into here and open the widget.js file and see how Esri has put together those out-of-the-box widgets, and you can kind of learn from those. But instead of jumping into one of those, I'm going to go down to the sample widgets folder, which is a special folder in here. And then here is a variety of widgets that are demos or examples that you can use to start off with. So today I'm going to start with the simple widget, which doesn't have much functionality at all. To create my own custom widget, I'm just going to go ahead and create a copy of this, and I'm going to rename it. I need to rename it in two locations. The first one is just literally this folder that the widget files are stored in. So I'm going to call my widget find restaurants. And I also need to rename it in the manifest.json file that I talked about before. So if I open this manifest.json file, you can see here is basically a JavaScript object that tells Web AppBuilder about our widget. I have to make sure that name is the exact same name as my folder that I just used. And then there's also this other metadata that you can update if you want, like you can update the author, for example, you can update the description, all of that stuff. And then this properties area is really special. This is what tells Web AppBuilder what functionalities your widget supports. So right now all of those are false, but throughout this demo we'll kind of work through most of those. But for right now I'm just going to close this, and I'm going to enable a widget by taking that folder and moving it up a level into that widgets location, or widgets repository, if you will. But really it's just copying that folder. And immediately that widget is available to be used in the Builder interface. So if I go over, switch back over to Web AppBuilder Developer Edition, and I go ahead and create a new app, which it sounds like you all are fairly familiar with. I'll call this a National Parks app. And Web AppBuilder is behind the scenes creating a new app for me on my local machine. This is the Builder interface. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically very similar to, or basically looks the same as the version that's on ArcGIS Online. On the left-hand side is where you can control your application, and on the right-hand side is the live preview. So I can maybe choose a theme, and Moxie will later talk about how we can put a custom theme in there. I need to choose my map, so let's go ahead and choose a map. So I'm going to create a National Parks app. So I've got a web map that I've created in ArcGIS Online that has the locations of all the national park properties across the United States, colored by the type of property that they are. And then, of course, the widgets area, which is where we all spend most of our time, right? So maybe I can add a widget, maybe the filter widget that's out of the box, where I can allow my users to filter down the data on the map to maybe only choose what park type they want to see. So let me choose unique, ask for values. And so immediately after I add that widget, I can see what it looks like in the map, and maybe as a user I want to only see the national parks, and so I can filter my data just like that. So that's the out-of-the-box widget. But like I was saying, if I go here, I can also see the Find Restaurants widget that I just added. And so let's go ahead and add that to the app. Of course, live demo, it's not going to work. But you can add that, and then the configuration panel, because we're in a simple widget, is not there yet. So we want to get into development. Let's not worry too much about that. I'm going to switch over to the Web App Viewer. So the Web App Viewer is kind of the simplest way to get into widget development. I want to develop my widget that's in the STEM app that I just created. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is go back to my STEM app folder. So I'm going to go back into Client, STEM app, and in the sample configs folder, there's a couple of config files that you can edit. So you can look at my URL bar here. I know it's a little small, but basically I went to the Web AppBuilder URL, and I said /web app viewer $config equals, and then the path to my config file. And so I've got this config file here. So basically when I load this page, Web AppBuilder is going to load this config file, which encompasses all the widgets and the web map that's in there. So I'm going to go into here. So you can see there's about 5 widgets up here. These are all the example widgets. For my demo, I'm just going to want to have my single widget. So let's change this to find restaurants. And I'm also going to want the web app viewer here to load my web map. So let me go over here and actually grab my web map ID, put that into the item ID. Now when I save this config.json and I refresh the page, we're going to see that my web map has loaded and my widget is over here, which is great. And I can see this is a very simple widget and get map ID. So now we're almost ready to do some development. I'm going to open this widget in a text editor. I'm using VS Code today. And I'm going to go into that STEM app widgets directory, and I'm going to go into the Find Restaurants folder. And I'm just going to make, just to get started, going to make a small edit to this widget.js file. So this is the main JavaScript file. You can see it's pretty simple. All it really is that text and then a button. So I'm going to put maybe some exclamation points in there to make sure, that things are all wired up correctly. And when I open my widget, we can see that those exclamation points are there. So I'm kind of all ready to go with my development. So let's get to adding some features. The first feature I'm going to add to this widget is to create a translations file. So it's kind of best practice to utilize the translation functionality that Web AppBuilder has built in for you, whether if you're going to utilize multiple languages or not. It's best practice to kind of utilize this and have all your constant strings in one location. So to do that, I've got some sample code here that I'm going to copy over so you don't have to watch me type. Oh, put it in the wrong location. So I'm going to copy this NLS folder into my widget folder. And then switching back to my code, and you'll find that this will be a common theme, that as I add new functionalities to my widget, I'm going to go into the manifest.json file and I'm going to enable a feature here. So in this case, has locale is what controls the translations. So I'm going to set that to true. And when I set that to true, that means Web AppBuilder is going to look in my widget folder into a folder called NLS for the strings.js file. So how does that strings.js file work? Well, you've got a variety of variables here and the translations of those words as their values. So you can see I've got this variable called welcome line, and then all those translations. And you also tell Web AppBuilder what translations you're supporting. So for example, in this case, we're using Spanish, that's ES. And if we've enabled it, it's going to look into a folder named that same string, ES, for a strings.js file in there. And you can see that these two files are basically the same. They've got the same variables, but just in the values here, they've got the translated strings there. So the idea is that I'll use these variables instead of the strings in my widget, and then Web AppBuilder will automatically look at the language that the user is using, and if you have a translation, we'll automatically put in that translation. So in my widget code, instead of that hard-coded string that we had before, I'm going to put the $, squiggly bracket here and put in NLS dot, and then the variable that I want to use. And so that's kind of the syntax of how I tell Web AppBuilder to automatically fill in that string. So now if I switch back to my widget and I refresh the page, we see this widget here, and we see that string there has changed to hello, which is great. That was our default language in the top level strings.js. And then if I open the same page over in Firefox, I have Firefox set to the locale set to Spanish. And so if I do the same thing over in my Firefox, we can see that string is automatically translated. So that's kind of how that translation works. And I like to get that kind of in place at the beginning before I even add any features to my widget. So we're all set on that. So now let's start adding some actual functionality to our widget. I'm going to copy over some code. And so with Web AppBuilder, I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but basically Web AppBuilder is built on the JavaScript API, the ArcGIS JavaScript API. So any features from the JavaScript API, and particularly JavaScript API widgets, you can utilize in your Web AppBuilder widgets, which is great. It really can save you some serious time when creating custom widgets. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go over to the JavaScript API and utilize their search widget, and we're going to place that into our widget. But before doing that, let's look at some of the files that I just added to our application. We've added a CSS folder, and in there we've got a style.css. So these are just some pre-computed CSS styles that I've created, so you don't have to watch me type those out. But I want Web AppBuilder to automatically load those. So I'm going to go into my manifest.json file and set the has style to true. And so Web AppBuilder is automatically going to look into that folder and load that CSS file for me. Similarly, for the config.json file, I've added that, and that's got a single setting. We're going to call it API key, and that's going to be the API key that we use to reach out to a third-party REST API later. But in the meantime, we just want Web AppBuilder to load that config.json file for us. So I'm going to change that has config setting to true. And then additionally, I've created a widget.html. So before in our widget.js, we had this template string right in line in our JavaScript. But I want to kind of separate that out to have my code a little bit cleaner. So I've got this widget.html file that has two divs, one for that's going to contain our search widget, and one that's going to contain our results. So I want Web AppBuilder to automatically load that widget.html file as my HTML template. So has UI file is going to be set to true. So I'll set that, and then I'll switch over to my widget.js file. Because we just enabled that widget.html, I can remove the template string here because we're not using that anymore. And now we're going to put most of our time for adding features is going to be spent in our widget.js file here. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a few dependencies using the AMD style includes. So here we've added, we still had the declare and base widget before, but we've added the Esri digit search. So that's what's coming over from the JavaScript API, and that's what we're going to utilize here. I've also added a reference to a Yelp module, this yelp.js. I'll talk about a little bit later that we'll be able to use, as well as the result display. Next, I'm going to add a base class. The base class is a property that we can set on our widget that will automatically wrap our widget in a class, in a CSS class, so that we can scope our CSS down to only affect our own widget. So that's definitely a best practice to do. And so I've added that here. Next, I'm going to use one of those lifecycle functions that I was talking about in the presentation, postcreate. Postcreate is a function that automatically gets sent or automatically gets called when the widget is added to the HTML DOM. So I just added all this code, and I know it looks kind of like a lot, but I'll kind of step through it here. Basically, all this code is going to get called automatically without me having to do anything. The first thing I'm doing is creating a new instance of Yelp. And the Yelp, again, is just a module that I've created that I'll show you later. But the interesting part here is that we're using this.config. If you remember from the beginning, this.config is automatically created in this context for us by Web AppBuilder, so I can just utilize it. And the API key is the property that I'm using here. So I can just pass that to my Yelp module. And that's something that Web AppBuilder provides because we extend from base widget. So we're also going to create an instance of the search widget. So I'm creating new search. And similar to the config variable, I can pass the map variable over to my search widget using this.map. And then using the Dojo convention, we're sending these parameters here. And then the second parameter is where we want to place our widget into. And in this case, I'm saying this.searchWidget wrapper because in our HTML file, I named that, it's pretty big here. I actually named that DOM node search widget wrapper. So utilizing that naming structure, I can just refer to DOM nodes like that. So this code is automatically going to place the JavaScript API search widget into the Web AppBuilder widget. And then I'm also going to set up an event to say when we get when someone does a search and does a select, call a function that we're going to define and pass the geometry of the location that they searched for. So now we need to actually define out that function. So I'll copy that in. So here's that show results for point that I was calling above. we're just going to take that geometry, that's a JavaScript API geometry, and we're going to call our getLocations function in the Yelp module. And now you don't have to worry too much about this, but basically we're just passing the latitude and longitude of the location that the user just searched, and we're going to call the Yelp API. And then finally we're going to call display results, which is a function we'll define out as well. This is also another function that is a good amount of, is a few lines of code here, but it's not too important to this demo. Basically, we're just clearing out the results area, and then we're taking the results from the Yelp API, and we're going to loop through all of those results and place them into our widget. So I'll put a comma there. So I know that was a lot, but let's switch back over to our widget. And you'll be able to kind of see all the stuff that we just built. So all of that code just was to create this search widget, and it doesn't look like a lot, but it actually placed the input text box, that search button, and if I do a search, it's automatically geocoding against the Esri World geocoder or your portal's geocoder if you have that set. And when I click on an item, what it did was it went through that event that we set up here. It called the Yelp API, and we got all the results back and displayed them. So you can see it placed that point on the map, it called out to the Yelp API and is showing the closest restaurants to that location. So that's a lot of functionality that we got going in a relatively small amount of code. I know if you're just getting into this, it might seem like a lot, but it's only a couple, 30, 40 lines of code. So that's pretty impressive that we're leaning on Web AppBuilder's functionality to do a lot of that stuff. Now we want to add one more functionality here to our app. So we're calling this the National Parks app, right? And if I zoom out, I can see all these national parks on the map, but if one of my app users wanted to find the restaurants near a particular location, there's not an easy way to do that, right? They would have to know the address of the national park right now, which that's an unreasonable thing for us to ask our users to do. So we want to allow them to kind of click on the national park and be able to kind of find the restaurants near that location pretty easily. Well, to do that, Web AppBuilder has a functionality, and it's called Feature Actions. There's this little 3 drop-down area here that allows you to do actions related to a particular feature that's on the map. And your custom widget can add a feature action to that list and allow you to reutilize some of your code, which is a really nice feature, and we'll kind of, I'll show you that real quick at the end of the demo here. So you don't have to watch me type all that stuff. I'll copy over a file. And similar to before, we're going to start with the manifest.json file. We need to tell Web AppBuilder that we want to use a feature action. So right after the properties variable here, I'm going to add a property called feature actions. That's going to be an array of all the feature actions that my widget supports. And each object in that array has just a name. We're going to call it restaurants near, and then a URI, which is the file name where you're going to define out your feature action, in this case restaurants near action. And that's the file I just copied in. So let's open that file and look at what it looks like. It's really just a few lines of code here. So similar to our widget where we're extending from Jimu/base widget, for a feature action, we're going to extend from Jimu/base feature action. And so that, because we extend from that, we need to define out two functions. The first one is feature supported. Now this is the function that gets automatically called by Web AppBuilder to ask, hey, should I show your feature action in this dropdown for this particular feature? And in our case, we're just saying, hey, if we have at least one feature, and if that feature's geometry is of type point, then go ahead and enable our feature action. And then the other function is just what gets called when the person clicks that feature action on execute. So in our case here, we're using the widget manager, which is also provided by Web AppBuilder, to open our widget. If it's not actually opened, it actually will open it for us. And then after that's done, we're actually calling show results for point. So if you remember from my previous code, if we switch over to widget.js, show results for point is the function that we were calling when someone did an address search. And so utilizing both Web AppBuilder and the JavaScript API, that the geometry is a point in both locations, we can reutilize our code that's in our widget.js for this feature action. And so we're able to get away with adding a pretty nice functionality without adding a lot of code. So we're just passing that point that we get back to that function, and then it'll basically run. So let me refresh our page here. And so now, in addition to being able to search an address, I can actually click on one of these points and click the feature actions. And now we've got our new feature action, find restaurants near here. And if I click that, it's going to take that point and pass it to my existing function that I already wrote for my widget and show the restaurants near that location, right? So that's great. We've got a widget that's pretty useful. You know, you can utilize it both in the widget panel, but also by using feature actions. The one last thing you might want to do is enable a settings page. The settings page is more worried about for when the app author is adding your widget to an app. How is the user experience for that? So let's add that real quick. I'm going to run through this real fast because we're going over time. But basically, we need to go back to our manifest.json file. Tell Web AppBuilder that we actually have a settings page. So that's this last property here. I'm going to set that to true. And then Web AppBuilder is automatically going to look into the setting folder. And like I said before, this is like a mini widget, right? So we've got setting.js and we've got an HTML template. And this is just a simple form. In this case, we're going to say ask for the API key, and then it's going to be a text input. In our setting.js, we define out a couple functions. One is setConfig, and this function is basically telling Web AppBuilder how to take our configuration JSON object and turn that into the web form. So in this case, we're placing the value of the API key that we're getting from the config into our input. And then getConfig is what gets called when the person clicks save on our settings page. And that's basically telling Web AppBuilder how to convert the form back into a JSON object. So here it's just really simple. We're returning a JSON object with API key, and we're grabbing the value from our form. So if we save that out and we go back to our Web AppBuilder application here, if we go to our find restaurants, we can see that now, before this was just a blank page, but now it's actually utilizing our setting widget there. So we've got our label and we've got our input box. And if you put in some text there and then you click edit again, you can see that it's saved. So when you're clicking OK here, and then when it's loading, it's utilizing our functions, setConfig and getConfig right there. So that's how you kind of make a nice UI for your widget so that other users can easily configure the widget. So that's all I got. So now we have our widget, and it's really nice, and we can send it off to a user. But our users might want to utilize it in apps that actually look good and look consistent with your company's branding. And so what do you need to do that? Well, Moxie's going to talk a little bit about theming.
Okay, now let's talk about theme. So I think for Web AppBuilder developers, you're going to spend a lot of time actually develop the widgets. And then there's another piece of development work is the theme. So what exactly is the theme? So theme really is about you as a company or as yourself. You have your own branding in a way. And when you make your work available, you want to have to make yourself stand out through the UI design. It's not coding, really it's the appearance part of it, and also how you organize your application, right? So theme is really about yourself. Now let's talk about let's define what exactly is a theme. Now there's a lot of terms actually to define applications, look and feel. Sometimes we call it skin, sometimes called a theme, or sometimes called a style. Now, a theme in the Web App Builder world, really there's different pieces really put together. And when you open up the application, usually you see something on top of it, right? You have the headers, and you have some widgets, you have some buttons or widgets already on the screen. So, and if you look at the application, right, here is the header, you already have it. So without doing anything, you already have it as part of the theme. And you can put your branding there with the header. And also there's some widgets actually, like search box actually is widget already put on the screen when you pick a theme. And there's some placeholders I'll show you later. And so that you can put some extra widgets onto it. And when you run application, and Gavin already showed you, when you develop the widgets, you don't need to worry about actually the frame of it. There's a panel already available for you. You just focus on develop the contents, the action part of the widgets. So the panel already provide for you actually from the theme. So that's really, it's a theme. And when you start developing a theme, and you're going to follow the very similar folder structures. As Gavin told you, so Web AppBuilder development is kind of opinionated. So what exactly it is? And it's there's a design pattern we call it design by convention. So since it's developer, I'll share you some kind of a design thinking behind the scene. So when we start actually design the Web AppBuilder, the goal is very simple. Try to make your job easier. Now how you actually make job easier is really taking the low level kind of things out of you. And as a developer, we want you to be a creator doing the creative works. I don't want you to be a plumber doing the low level things. That's what we're doing. So to do that, really we set up a lot of conventions like the folder structures and naming conventions. If you follow that kind of convention, your job will be a lot easier. Of course, you can change that. It's just harder. Now, the folder structure of the theme is really, really similar to, actually it's almost identical as the web structure. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it. So I'll show you, first of all, actually, when you open up the Web AppBuilder, right, there's some built-in themes already available. As I mentioned earlier, there's some placeholder that's come with the theme. And there's some pre-configured widgets, like a search box. And every little thing here actually are widgets, right? When you open up a theme, each one has its own little things already put out there. It's all part of the theme. And also another thing is a style. Style in our case really is just the color scheme of the theme. You can change the colors. Another thing is called layout. Each thing you can lay out those, pre-arranged widgets in different way. So that's the thing. So if you look at the code, what exactly how this put together. Right? Now in the right hand side is our Web AppBuilder developer editions folder structure. There's a client, there's a server. Now if you open up the client side, there's a stem apps. Within the stem app, there's a folder called a theme. Underneath, really those folder structures are very similar to widget development. Right? There's a whole bunch of themes. Let's just open up the demo themes. That's the simplest one we have now. And first of all, you look at the manifest file. The manifest file really is, if you're a theme designer, this is almost like your canvas. You put your thought on it, how you actually want to design your theme. And I already showed you there's some panels. The panels, there's a panel sections I defined what panel is going to be available to the theme. I'll talk about the panel later. And there's the styles. Styles really is the color scheme I mentioned earlier. And for this one, we have a red and black. And the layout. And there's different layout and the rest of them. Really, this just tell the Web AppBuilder, okay, what the structure, what inside the theme. Now, how that actually organized at the code level. No. There's things called a panel. Panel is quite important. That's another thing that actually takes some low-level work away from you. panel is really just the frame, the window part of the Web AppBuilder. You can take your content, put into a panel, and make it available as part of the widget development configuration. So develop the panel, really it's very, very similar as the develop an widget. And I'll show you code here. It's the simplest one. When you develop the widget, you have a base widget coming from the Web AppBuilder GMU package. The same thing, when you develop the panel, you have a base widget panel come with the whole library. Then you just define your panel. You can make a panel round, you can make it draggable, you can make it movable. All that is panels work. And as a widget developer, you don't need to worry about it. You just apply your panel to the widget and done with it. So that's the panel. And what is the style? Style, obviously, is just a CSS file. So as a JavaScript developer, you're already familiar with this. You come up with the JavaScript file, and you design the style. And the GMU library has some kind of a style token actually defined for you, and you can apply it to it. And another thing is the layout. So at the code level, what exactly is the layout? Layout and is actually it's predefined configuration file. If you're already familiar with the Web AppBuilder development, every apps underneath there's a configuration file defines everything you already configured for the application. Now, this is a predefined application file. The differences is actually at the lower end, there's some placeholders, and you can see actually this is really just the one application configuration, right? We define the widgets on the screen. That's how when you click on the theme, you already see some widgets are actually on the screen. And there's some positions. Positions really is the placeholder later on. You can put a widget onto it. There's only differences actually here. You have some positions. Other than that, this is just very complete application configuration file. So for different layout, you can just imagine, say, I want to arrange application this way. You come up this layout configuration file and put it here. And once you have that, and your theme gonna have a different layout showing up here. So that's how you create your application, your themes. And if you look at those actual theme we shipped along with the Web AppBuilder, you can see there's a widget holder. Why there's a widget holder, right? When you develop the widget, usually you put it into this folder. That's the common folder. So remember the idea when we actually design the Web AppBuilder is try to make your job easier. We want to also make things shareable. Like when you develop your widgets, you can package them together and share with others. The same thing, when you develop the theme, we want to can package the theme together with manifest file, all that together, and zip it and give it to somebody else. And someone else actually can take it, just put it into the folder, it should be just working, right? That's why when you actually pre-define the theme with some pre-arranged widgets available for the theme, we want to put the widgets here, so that when you share this theme to others, the other people don't have to say, oh, okay, there's some themes, I have to look in for the theme and define it, put it out there. That kind of work should be gone, and everything should be here. That's why we actually, like for this theme, we have a header controller come with it. When you click it, there's a header controller already there. That's the theme. That's the widget. So we package that header controller into this widget folder. So once we package them all together, if you zip it, we can get shared with others. So because this is really developed themes is really similar in as developed in the widget, so I'm not going to actually do in the live development. Just remember, there's a two aspect of actually involve actual coding when you develop a theme. One is that you might actually develop the widgets specifically for the theme. And you might actually create your own panel, which is similar to widget development, and put it here as part of the theme and share with others. So, and once you've done that, you put into the folder structure, then you're gonna have a new theme. That's how you develop a theme. So let's back to, and just we don't see a whole lot of people actually developing themes now. Later on in the next, we'll talk about in the roadmap. We're actually going to come up with a theme builder to help you even a simpler way actually to develop your theme. So before I go into the roadmap, I'll like to go and show you and talk about the community.
Yeah, thanks, Moxie. So we'll just talk about the community, you guys, real quick, and then so Moxie can get into the road ahead, which is really, I think, better information. Documentation pages are here, or you can just Google Web AppBuilder. There's different documentation for the online version versus the developer version. So just note that a lot of the stuff that we were doing today was in the developer version, so you want to go to the developers.arcgis.com for all the documentation on that. Please go to GeoNet with your custom widgets, post your custom widgets, post your custom themes, and check out what people have posted. There's tons and tons of widgets out there that people are posting, so it's great. If you're looking for more training on Web AppBuilder, there's a lot of good tutorials and things that, I guess, training classes on training.esri.com that will kind of go through what we went through today, but a little bit slower. And then here are some links to places where you can find widgets. And also at the bottom there is the example widget that I went through. I know I went through it pretty quickly, so you can get the entire source code of that widget that I was building today at that esriurl.com/13950. Cool. So that's all I got for community.
Okay, let's talk about what's coming. And Web AppBuilder has been around for a few years, but we cannot just stand still because the technology is evolving and the way people creating applications is changing. Your user actually is changing as well, how to utilize applications. So we're actually should move along and evolving in the Web AppBuilder. And Web AppBuilder has been pretty successful. A lot of people start using it and generate a lot of feedbacks. We're used by different kind of organizations, right? But still, and the challenges I mentioned in the very beginning are still existing actually. In some of them, like say, I want to manage the application as a whole life cycle of it. I'll talk about that. And I want to actually learn how people are using this application. All that has to be dealt with, right? And from user really, and what you want is you want less coding, and less coding is not coding. You want to focus your coding on the real valuable task, not the plumbing side. I keep saying that, right? And also you want to make it easier, simpler, and we see actual application creation change over time. And before we try to campaign and say, hey, you want to configure application rather than programming everything, right? Now actually, Web AppBuilder makes your job easier. We see actually the way we're changing is the business use of technology merging with how consumers are using our technology. What that means is that sometimes we're not focused on the feature and the functions. We focus on the experience of using technologies. Experience including how actually obtain your software, right? How do you deploy your software? How actually when I open up your application, you feel good about it and like to use it, and how easily they can use the application to solve their life, business problem. All that is about experience. Right? So, of course, there's some fundamental things we want to solve. Is that how we actually can easily help translate your requirement into application? How do you manage things? So we have this coming, evolving of Web AppBuilder. We call it Experience Builder. So, and what the Experience Builder does? Well, still we're doing the same thing as the Web AppBuilder, but we're going a little bit further, actually help you organize and to build other web items we call, like pages, or maybe dashboards, or maybe story maps, all of that, right? We want to have a common experience environment, shared user experience environment to build web things for you. And why are we doing that, right? And because the application is really complicated. Actually, the one web application involves a lot of things. We talk about there's themes, there's authorization, logins, there's web maps, web themes, and lots of stuff actually underneath applications, right? And as the developers, technical people, so you have to deal with it sometimes. But for users or for people who understand the business, just creating applications, they don't need to deal with that. And that's one part of it. We want to hide from actually any user to provide them better experience to create application. Another aspect is that application has a life cycle, and it's not just you create application done with it, right? You want to manage the whole life cycle of the application. Start from your configure application, test it, make it available to users, and then you need to gather feedbacks from users. How actually the user going to use the application? Which function you use more frequently from these applications? You want to understand that. And use application as the closed loop. You need to optimize your application. You not improve it. Right? So the whole life cycle should be well managed through this new, better experience environment. So essentially, the application of web app item is the center part of it. Application is almost like a piece of data. You need to manage that. Application is not something just set on there and used and maintain it. It's a piece of data. You need to maintain it. And also, you use an application to understand the users, and then you're using application to deal with the whole life cycle of the usage from the users. So we want to provide that kind of environment with the coming Web App Builder or Experience Builder to help you doing that. So essentially, the whole website item is going to be the central. It's not like tools. Right now, Web App Builder is the tools. Right? Using the tools, you can do a whole bunch of things. Rather, the next evolution is that your content, your web items, is going to be the central point. And we're going to have a whole bunch of capabilities to manage your application, creating your application, manage the lifecycle of application, help you optimize your application creation, that kind of thing. So that's the things we're doing it. Now, and more concrete things deal with the Web Builder is that, right now we have this path from JavaScript 3.0 to 4.0, right? And the next version of the Web Builder is going to be built totally on JavaScript 4x. That means we're going to have a 2D, 3D all together. Not right now, we didn't tell you actually. Underneath we have a separate, right? We have a 3D and a 2D all using different API. And the next version is that everything going to be on the 4x. So you're going to develop a JavaScript 4x applications. Right? So, and also we're going to have a better support for mobile users. And mobile going to play a very important role actually for your users. There's some mobile-centric kind of a technology going to coming from the Web App Builder or Experience Builder, the system. So that's it. And we have a couple of minutes to answer questions. Go ahead.
So this might be kind of a stupid question.
No, it's not.
Called Web App Builder, but is there any way to take these technologies offline in a disconnected state?
The question is if there's a way to take this offline. And depends on how you define the offline. So right now you can have the developers edition basically doing works offline. It's not quite offline because you still need to point to your map, which may be available from portal or from online.
Right.
Yeah.
So I get if can you download resources that you can make available to the user using the application in a completely disconnected state? I'm guessing the answer is probably no on that.
Probably right now it's no. And there's working on a JavaScript environment to deal with the offline disconnect way. Basically, you need to cache your maps, put everything online. You remember, it's not just the code. We need the contents, right? Everything has to be offline to be offline. But we're working on that.
Great. And yeah, I'm thinking like iPad out the
Yeah, that's very reasonable requirement actually. That's why we're working on that kind of offline disconnect way of doing it. Yeah.
So when you create your app, how can you push it back into general personal flow
Mm-hmm.
so that you can utilize the app to create?
Yeah, in portal environment, there's two ways. One is that you can copy it over you talk about apps or widgets. Widgets, yeah. If you drop the widgets into certain, we actually have a document and talk about how to do that. Basically, once you create your widget, you put it into a certain folder, then it will be available. Also, we have a certain UI to allow you to upload to it. And right now, we're working on an online environment and try to make your widget, your custom widget, available in an online environment too. But there's some legal security issues we have to deal with. But we're working on that.
When's the next version of Web AppBuilder coming out, and will the customizations you made to the widget translate over into the next version?
And for next version, every 2 months or so, we're going to have a version. Next major version actually is the transition from 3x to 4x, right? Yeah, that's the question. So probably in the first quarter of this year, we're going to have an earlier version of the new Web AppBuilder, which is totally based on the 4x. But the functionality then going to be a little bit limited because we're going to spend a lot of time to migrate those built-in widgets. So at that time, it's almost similar to the current state of JavaScript. We're going to have an old version, which is based on 3x. We're going to have a new version. And next year depends on when the JavaScript 4x is complete. Then we can have a few months of a lagging time to move everything to 4x. That's for everything built in. But for your stuff, if you develop the widgets on 3x, probably you have to really migrate it by yourself, involve some coding. Yeah.
I think one more.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's the important feature we're working on. We realize actually sometimes you want to put two windows on two machines and they talk to each other, right? And that's the major feature we're working on. It will have that.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
So I guess anybody else who has any questions will be here afterwards, or if you want to stop over at the Web AppBuilder Island, we'll be there afterwards as well. So
All right, thank you.
thanks everybody.